Welcome back to the LOBLOLLY PINES Publishing Podcast. I am KJ Duff, and today I'm going to be reviewing Haruki Murakami's most recent novel, The City and Its Uncertain Walls. I have a deep love and respect for Murakami's work, so forgive me if this episode is a tad bit longer than usual. Fair warning, my dear listeners, I will be doing a little, fawning reverence. Before we dive into the good stuff, you know what's coming next? That's right, shameless plugs. If you haven't already done so, please go check out my debut novel, Halcyon's Suicide, a story that attempts to answer the question, is it possible to live a happy, fulfilling life without an assigned purpose? You can find the link to the novel on my website, www.LOBLOLLYPINESPublishing.com, or simply click the link in the description below. Finally, if you like what I'm trying to build here, please consider subscribing and hit the notification button to be notified when a new episode premieres. I sincerely appreciate any support you're willing to give. Okay, enough with the obligatory promotions. Time to immerse ourselves in the world of Haruki Murakami's The City and Its Uncertain Walls. Originally published in Japan on April 13th, 2023 by Shinchosha, then translated by Philip Gabriel and published in the US on November 19th, 2024 by Knopf, The City and Its Uncertain Walls is about a man who finds himself torn between two worlds, the real world and, for the sake of this review, a fantasy world. As a teen in the real world, the man fell into a deep, profound love with a girl from a different town. They wrote to each other weekly, and when they had free time, they spent all of it with each other, talking about everything from literature to music. One day, she confides to him that she is actually a shadow, and that her real self is in a city surrounded by a wall. In that city, she works in a library with a clock that has no hands, where she assists the town's dream reader. In that city, there is no concept of linear time. Unicorns roam the plains outside the wall, and the only way you can enter this city is to have your shadow removed by the gatekeeper who guards the only entrance. When she suddenly and mysteriously disappears, however, the man has no choice but to continue on with his life. Before he knows it, he is a middle-aged bachelor, and though he has tried, he is unable to settle down with anyone else, his heart still yearning for his first and only love. He aches to find the city surrounded by the high wall, determined to shed his shadow and join that world where he can, once again, be reunited with his beloved. But how does one journey from the real world to one of fantasy? And is the cost of admission into the city and its uncertain walls too high? I'm going to be honest with you, my dear listeners. My summary of this novel does not do it proper justice. The story is so complex that I cannot summarize it in a traditional sense. As I alluded to in the introduction, I love Haruki Murakami's work. As of this recording, as a 39-year-old man in 2025, he is undoubtedly my favorite contemporary author. This does not mean I do not know how to be impartial in my review. There is a line between fawning reverence and blind fanatic worship. Murakami, like many artists past and present, has his faults, but that is what it means to be an artist. On any level, whether it be literature, music, or cinema, not all paintings are going to be master strokes. Before I get into the review of The City and Its Uncertain Walls, here comes the fawning reverence you'll, thankfully, only have to suffer through once. Twice if you're a masochist. When I made a firm decision about becoming a published author, I purchased many books on the subject, including Stephen King's book titled On Writing. There are many gems I kept from that book, but perhaps the most important lesson I learned was one that Stephen King made sure was crucial for aspiring writers to know. You cannot write if you do not read. I'll repeat that for the people in the back. If you do not read, you cannot write. Read everything. Good books, bad books, magazines, the back of cereal boxes if they still do that. Anything and everything. If you are not a reader, you can't be a writer. And novelist as a vocation, Murakami would expand upon this take, stating, "If you're not enjoying yourself in what seems important to you, if you can't find spontaneous pleasure and joy in it, then there's likely something wrong." Essentially, if you can't find joy in what you supposedly love to do, then what's the point? I took Stephen King's advice and decided that before I put pen to paper, I would dedicate time to becoming an avid reader. I started with Albert Camus' novel, The Stranger, and came away with my mind blown. I did not know a novel could have such a profound effect on me. However, after I finished the book, I didn't know where to go next. That's when one of my oldest friends, Numa, suggested I read Haruki Murakami's 2011 magnum opus, 1Q84. 1Q84 follows Tengo and Aomame, two people who have not seen each other since elementary school, who find themselves in an alternate version of the year 1984, only they are the only ones who seem to notice. They live two completely distinct lives concurrently, all the while their thoughts drift toward each other. Numa told me, "It's 1,328 pages, but if you get through it, you'll like most everything else he's done." He was not wrong. From the opening page, I was swept away. It was unlike anything I'd ever read before. The way the characters spoke, the world Murakami constructed, the life he breathed into it. Even the structure was unique, with each chapter alternating between the two protagonists. Have you ever read something or watched something or heard a song that, when it hits you, you go, if I were to write something or sing something, this is exactly how I would do it. That's how I felt reading 1Q84. It was that feeling exactly. I consumed that novel and wanted more. Murakami's words stirred something fantastic in me, and I wanted that feeling to wash over me over and over again. Soon enough, I found myself purchasing his complete oeuvre. Most are unequivocally Murakami, with his signature common themes of existential crisis, bending of reality, loneliness, love and loss, and the question of identity. From Hear the Wind Sing, Pinball 1973, and colorless Tsukuru Tazaki and his years of pilgrimage, to A Wild Sheep Chase, Norwegian Wood, and one of my personal favorites, Kafka on the Shore. These are the books that, to me, define Murakami and really showcase his literary mastery of the written word, in a genre that has become synonymous with his name. You cannot say magical realism without thinking of the name Haruki Murakami. I have said so much about Murakami, yet, with all my fawning, I feel I have yet to fully convey the power behind the magic he performs with words. Of course, not everything Murakami creates is amazing. I found A Wind-Up Bird Chronicle intolerable. It was way too long, and by the time I got to the end, I just didn't care if the main character ever found his wife or not. I just wanted it to be over. Murakami pushed all of the familiar buttons, but none of them moved me. Same for Killing Commendatore, which started off promising. The story had an air of eeriness and darkness twisted around it that I found quite refreshing, but when it unfolded, I was left nonplussed. In Hard-Boiled Wonderland and the End of the World, the narrative tries to blend a cyberpunk reality, think of the film Johnny Mnemonic, I don't know if anyone's ever seen that, but yeah, it kind of has that feeling, with a dreamlike fairy tale narrative featuring a town at the end of the world surrounded by a wall where the protagonist has to go to the library and read dreams. Sound familiar? Murakami tried to get these two stories to connect at the end. It was a solid effort, but ultimately the narrative just seemed too different to connect thematically. I felt like I was reading two different stories, not one story with intertwining realities. A conclusion Murakami later admits he himself felt. This brings me to the present day and Murakami's recent release, The City and Its Uncertain Walls. I have never been so excited for the release of a new novel. I was checking Google every week to see when the US release date would be revealed. I was so eager to get my hands on a copy. I seriously considered buying the Japanese version and trying to translate it myself. But I remained patient. And the day it finally released in the US, I ordered my special edition hardcover copy. From the UK because I despised the US cover. It's effing horrendous. It's so bad, I had to curse. I mean, look at this. See? Anyway, I ordered it from the UK, and again, waited patiently for it to arrive. When I received it, I was unable to read it immediately because, life. However, once the busy part of the year settled down, I was finally able to pick it up, and, as expected, I couldn't put it down. However, when I started to read the book, I felt like I had read it before. Part of this story, the fantastical portion, is ripped straight from Hard-Boiled Wonderland and the End of the World. A man reaches the end of the world in a land crawling with one-horned beasts in a city surrounded by a high wall. He is tasked with being the library's dream reader, a very important job in that town. But before he can enter the city, he must abandon his shadow and leave it with the gatekeeper of the city. I knew where the story was going because I already knew all of this from Hard-Boiled Wonderland and the End of the World. What I didn't understand was why Murakami chose to retell this story. I'm not gonna lie, part of me felt cheated as a reader. I was so excited to read a new story by Murakami. To open it and find that the story is a rehash of something he'd done decades ago left me understandably a bit disappointed. But the more I read on, the more I began to understand this is nothing like Hard-Boiled Wonderland and the End of the World. As I said before, the two narratives in Hard-Boiled Wonderland and the End of the World just didn't make sense to me. It felt like I was reading two stories. The city and its uncertain walls is a perfect union of both narratives. They don't just connect at the end, they invariably intertwine from start to finish. Granted, yes, the question of whether you are following the man or his shadow does become a bit tricky if you take your eye off the thread you're following. However, knowing that they are essentially the same person makes the story much more fluid as it shapeshifts. The story is told in three parts. In part one, we are introduced to the main character, his girlfriend, and the concept of the city behind the wall. When the girlfriend disappears, he remembers that she said her real self was in that town, and he ventures out to find her. In part two, and perhaps the best portion of the book because it is here where we spend the most time with the man and the cast of characters, the man, now middle-aged, abandons his stable, status quo life in exchange for life in a small, rural town. But instead of it being enclosed by walls like the dreamlike town, it is actually surrounded by mountains. He is drawn to work in a local library where he's made the head librarian, overseeing the day-to-day needs of the library. He begins to make a life there, but he still yearns for the fantasy world. Part 3 brings us back to the fantasy world where everything finally comes to an end. One important factor to note going into this story is that though the disappearance of the man's girlfriend is vital to the story, the book is not about the mystery of her sudden disappearance, but about the impact that that disappearance has on the main character as he grows into middle-aged adulthood. It is the catalyst that makes the man grapple with his identity, his emptiness, loneliness, and the piece of him that remains out of reach, lost to the black void in his heart. The characters that inhabit the world pair perfectly around the main character. From Mrs. Soeda, the no-nonsense librarian that is basically second in command to the main character in the library, Mr. Koyasu, the eccentric owner of the library with a tragic history and my favorite element of the book, to the boy with the yellow submarine parka, and yes, the girlfriend who vanishes like smoke. The City and Its Uncertain Walls is 464 pages long, but I was so engrossed in the story that the pages turned quickly. By the time I reached the second part of the story, it no longer felt like a story I knew. I no longer knew how it might end. It felt like, yeah, I was reading a new book. It has all the elements that are essentially Murakami. Main character giving up his stable, status quo life for one of uncertainty as they grapple with existential issues, magical elements, and references to pop culture, with Japan, as always, the backdrop of the story. And to touch on that, another reason I love Murakami stories is that even though they are set in Japan and the characters are Japanese, you do not have to be Japanese to relate to these characters or the story. Their issues are timeless and universal. They transcend culture and nationality. It all falls in place like a vivid puzzle of wild cherry blossoms. Beautifully. This is not to say the book doesn't have its faults. I didn't feel like the actual act of dream reading was explored enough. At the end of the day, I still don't know what the act signified or its importance, or if it was just a metaphor for something deeper. And it's possible that this has to do with my own literary ignorance. Also, and this is perhaps my biggest gripe with this novel, there is this thing Murakami does in this book that becomes irritating. Characters will go through lines and or paragraphs of explaining something to another character, and then when the person is done explaining, the other character will then turn around and repeat the same thing, like confirming they got the details and facts right and understood their order correctly. It just felt like filler. Like Murakami was sitting at his typewriter trying to meet a word quota for the day. This happens a lot in the book. Not as much as you might think, but enough times to notice. I literally started skipping paragraphs because I knew the information already, even if the character was a bit slow on the uptake. I don't know if this was done purposely to give us the illusion of stagnant time, but after a while, yeah, it got annoying. Also, the characters are all very formal and sound the same. You kind of lose sight of who's speaking because there's nothing distinctive about their personalities and manner of speaking. It's all very formal and proper, and I don't know if that's the translation or if it's because these traits are innately Japanese. All that aside, there is nothing I can point to that I can honestly say made me dislike this story. It's not his best work, but all in all, I consider The City and Its Uncertain Walls a much better version than Hard-Boiled Wonderland and The End of the World. As a matter of fact, it stands on its own. That being said, if you are new to the world of Haruki Murakami, The City and Its Uncertain Walls may turn you off, mainly because the way the story ebbs and flows from the main character to the shadow version and so forth. It is very easy to lose the thread and let go of the rope completely. The ending is left to interpretation. You have to do some homework to make it make sense. It does, I assure you, but you may not like having to do the extra credit work. Remember, this isn't a straight-laced mystery about a missing woman. It is a story about love, loss, and loneliness, how to cope with it, how it can consume you and leave you in darkness when you willingly resign yourself to it, and how there is still hope to come out on the other side. Ultimately, the choice is yours. In the afterword of the book, Murakami explains why he decided to revisit the world of The City and Its Uncertain Walls. And again, I'm going to paraphrase here because I'm not well versed on YouTube's copyright laws when it comes to literature. He explains that he wrote the original story early in his career and had it published in a magazine, but never felt that it was quite fully formed. He would attempt it again with Hard-Boiled Wonderland and The End of the World, but that attempt also left him feeling like he had a fishbone stuck in his throat. His words, not mine. 3 decades later, during the pandemic, he saw an opportunity to revisit the story and finally put The City and Its Uncertain Walls to rest. I'd say, mission accomplished. Naturally, art is subjective. Beauty is in the eye of the beholder. What I read may resonate with me more than the next person. It's true of all forms of art. If you listen to a certain song, there's something about it that when it sonically hits your ears, you can't explain why it moves you. You just know that it does. There's something embedded deep within its core that you relate to. That's how I feel about Murakami. Every time I finish reading one of his stories, I feel like the doors and windows to my soul have flown wide open, letting in a much needed, refreshing, cleansing breeze. I say all this being well aware that as an author, you either love him or think he's alright. And that's fine. As Murakami once wrote, if you only read the books that everyone else is reading, you can only think what everyone else is thinking. At the end of the day, what we look for in art are the ideas that challenge our fixed beliefs of the mechanics of existence and society, and reflect how we understand and experience the world around us. Haruki Murakami is a master of magical realism, and in this stage of his career as a novelist, that mastery remains unparalleled. And well, that's it. I think we've done it. Thank you all for sticking with me through this episode. I hope you all enjoyed the review. If you read Haruki Murakami's The City and Its Uncertain Walls, I'd love to hear your thoughts on it. Please leave a comment below, and remember, be respectful. We're all here because of our love of literature and the world it opens up to us. Also, if you like the review and haven't grown weary of my voice, please consider subscribing to the channel and hit the notification bell to be alerted when a fresh episode premieres. I'm currently reading Sylvia Plath's The Bell Jar. I just started, so give me a few weeks. Once I'm done, I'll get right to work on the review, so stay tuned for that one. Lastly, you know I have to bookend the episode with another plug. Halcyon Suicide. My debut novel is available for purchase. The link is in the description below. Buy it, read it, and review it honestly. If you liked it, buy another one and give it to your mom for Christmas. If you don't, put it in your bathroom for those times when you run out of toilet paper. I've been KJ Duff. Thank you as always for your continued support. I love you, my human beings. Talk to you next time on the LOBLOLLY Pines Publishing Podcast. LOBLOLLY Pines Publishing Podcast. LOBLOLLY Pines Publishing Podcast. Bit my tongue.